Jay from Alta Love, and today I want to talk to you about why the system is sort of inevitably going to collapse. And this isn't about like fear mongering or making people really scared that there's this like inevitable sort of doom and collapse around our economy, but there is that energy around a lot of the world's structures, and that has a lot to do with basically us as people and how we operate from within ourselves. Hence the title of this video being Imbalanced Structures Collapse. And that's like totally, if we look at the kind of, I always get these confused, like the macrocosm or the microcosm. We look at like the individual, and we can see that in our own lives, if we're not perceiving clearly, or if we're working too much, we get sick. If we're spending too much, we bottom out. If various indulgences that if we feel too much guilt, we end up self-punishing. It's just the nature of manifestation ultimately. And so as people, we've been kind of telling this story of this patriarchy, which clearly if we're living in solely a patriarchy, we have an imbalance there, because we're only honoring you could even say like a distorted perception of men and masculine energy. But if we're holding a distorted perception of men and masculine energy, we're bound to be holding distorted energy around the feminine and female energy. So we can see these imbalanced projections and polarities trying to uphold a structure which inevitably is bound to collapse because the foundation is sinking, you could say, or the actual structure is starting to topple over because we've been in denial of our divinity. We've been in denial of our true roots on an earthly level and on a cosmic level. So as we awaken to a lot more of our expansive cosmic and eternal and infinite connection, then we have the power to basically ground new foundations, to build much more stable structures for one another, for ourselves on this planet, and for one another, and integrating it so that it does support the totality is like a big part of it. And that's where a lot of what we would say like the divine feminine aspects, that's where a lot of those aspects come in, is that we do want to feel compassion for one another. We do want to feel love for one another. We don't want to feel overwhelmed and burdened by all of the world's issues. And yet, when we come into greater balance, it's really easier to contain the totality. So it's easier to actually naturally invoke a solution mindset. So we can see how these new structures can be put in place. And then again, naturally allow the letting go and the dissolving of old structures and systems that really don't support the totality, that really only support a select few. And I'm seeing breaks, so I'm seeing like different pockets of the population in these coming years. Basically those who have been still more in denial, more using power over, using class and status to, whether you're like openly being mean to people or even just in your mind, if you're like, thinking you're better than other people or superior to other people, all of those nuances, you could say, are more going to come to the light. So people who are like, social climbers and trying to get ahead and all that kind of stuff, again, through like shitty means, basically, by dominating or thinking you're better than other people, limiting yourself, so not fully stepping into your power. That's an aspect of collapse, right? So people who are being asked to step into their power, it's really time now to start expressing the truth of who you are. But a lot of a lot of this expression is divine, right? So it's necessary for that energy to start to permeate the collective energy field. And as you guys know, these shares are intuitive. Like sitting in meditation this morning, listening, feeling and hearing that what's coming through is this idea of imbalanced structures collapse, and how to gently start to vocalize like the deeper sort of imbalances. And personally, what I'm doing in a rebalancing way is having to really look at the denial of the feminine aspect and what that means for me. So disempowered threads of as a female in the society, expected to just give it away for free. Oftentimes how men kind of approach the situation, and oftentimes this isn't always the case, but often men just assume they can have whatever they want, and there's no real kind of like discussion. It's just like, no, well, that's your role, and that's something I'm really working with, as far as, in the past, how much I would just give away for free, and time, and that's something as well. As a female in the world, it's almost like my time and energy and all that is just expected to be offered up for free, for nothing, to the patriarchy, right? Because the patriarchy looks after me. But that's not it's false. It's not true. The patriarchy, in essence, because it's a distortion of truth, it only looks after itself, and is like the blind force of patriarchy is having people just work like slaves to no end, just upholding this sort of perceived, phallic kind of structure that it's like gold and shiny, and everybody's chasing it with this promise of like the American dream, or this promise of being wealthy or being successful in this world. And yet this phallic system, really, when you turn the lights off, it's just an empty shell, or a toppling egg. Like, it's all toppling over because it's not integrated. There's no love in the patriarchy. The love has been denied. So as we awaken to our love as human beings, suddenly all this like corruption and deception and power over games and like treating the planet like shit, suddenly all that stuff is just like, what are you doing? Why are we behaving like that? And fortunately, through a loving capacity, we can awaken with greater love. We can honor one another with a greater loving capacity, but also start to pick up on those subtle imbalanced nuances. Like growing up in a privileged state, often we are entitled and we assume, like, just give it to me. Like, this person should just do that for me, or da-da-da. And that, snapping our fingers and telling each other what to do because we're better than, all of that is going to change. And certainly for me, as a woman, and I can only really speak for myself, but I imagine other people will also resonate with these threads. Like, I am claiming my worth and claiming, like, if the dynamic exchange, if you're expecting more time from me, or expecting this, that, or the other of this kind of engagement, where, because I'm stepping into my worth and my value, there's more discernment around that. And also navigating new paradigm business and from within an old mentality and structure. So in essence, being practical, grounded, but then infusing cosmic wisdom into a grounded practicality in exchange for economic growth, right? And so we ground the energy down into the planet to receive. Ultimately, it's not really about getting stuff from other people. It's about grounding my own light-filled and loving awareness into the ground so that the foundation is secure, and then building my own world, essentially. Like, that's, for me personally, like, that's like literally physically what I'm doing, is like actually putting roots in the ground, putting trees in the ground, building things that will help support a life on Earth, a human life on Earth, So, practically putting roots down, building, and then being part of the building process, and that's a big part of it, right? Is that the majority of the world structure as we know it, women weren't a part of the building of that. It's like women weren't a part of a yoga tradition, or women weren't a part of the church. You know, we denied the feminine fully. Women and men denied the feminine for some expansive universal reason. And as we begin to reclaim the feminine, it's realizing that we need a total holistic perspective to build a proper structure. Otherwise, it's just fucked, basically. Like the world as we know it, like the world that we're looking at is kind of all purging and falling apart because it doesn't work. It only worked for a limited amount of time because it was imbalanced, because it was only honoring an aspect of self which was disconnected from the whole, which was separate from the whole, honoring the human being as being in dominion to the totality rather than in union with the totality. So the more as beings we come into union with self, the more we can exemplify and lead by example the firmer foundation, which builds a much nicer structure. And that really does have to come through that dynamic exchange, energetically speaking, and more people owning their worth as divine creators, you know, whether we're creating homes or retreats or businesses or families, whatever it is we're creating, make sure we're creating from a place of balance and integrity, because that serves the whole. Ultimately, I hope that was useful to you guys. Have an awesome day, and I look forward to speaking to you real soon. Peace out.